Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here. I hope you're having a great start to your Memorial Day weekend. And tonight, it's Friday Night Mike. We're going to talk college football. We're going to talk about some of these rulings that have come down, some of these decisions, some of these votes from around the nation. We've seen the SEC president's vote to start college football players back with voluntary workouts on campus June 8th. Big 12 has voted. They're June 15th. I saw Nebraska is June 1st, and Michigan has had one of their orders extended through June 12th, so no to Michigan. Ohio State says June 8th. So what we're seeing is what we predicted, that there would be a lack in uniformity when the schools would return to work. Now, the key here to remember is that these are voluntary workouts. These are not workouts that are going to be supervised by coaches. And therefore, I don't know how much of an advantage it really is. I suppose, to me, it's more about safety, and you guys have heard me advocate that it's safer for the players to work out on campus than in their home communities. I've been saying that from the beginning. And obviously, there's a lot of experts that agree with that now. So I want to welcome you to Friday Night Mike. When I started doing this show, didn't really know what to expect from it. But I'll tell you what, y'all turn out and we have a good time. We talk a lot of football and solve a lot of the world's problems. I don't know if they know it or not, but we got all the answers right here. So before you ask about my colors, okay, got to do some repping. Memorial Day weekend. I want to thank all the veterans out there, certainly those of you that have had family members that have served, that have made the ultimate sacrifice. That's what this weekend is about, to remember the people that sacrificed for our country to make us who and what we are. I know there's people out there that may not agree with this political stance or that political stance or where this country's going, whatever. To get to the point where we're at right now, and I think all of us that are on this podcast tonight, we would say we're fortunate enough to have a laptop or an iPhone to be talking about football. That's a luxury, folks. Obviously, there's other parts of the world that don't have it this good. So I want to take a moment to thank all the veterans and to thank all the people, the families of military members that made the ultimate sacrifice. I was fortunate to serve with veterans, and I heard a lot of stories of men that sacrificed, and so it certainly means a lot to me, and it's something that I don't forget, and it's something that I don't take lightly. I'm very thankful for the people that have made sacrifices to give me and my family an opportunity to live in this great country. So that's kind of where I'm at. Some people might go, that's kind of cheesy, Mike. Well, maybe it is, but it's what I believe in. And when you believe in something, I think you should feel comfortable sharing it. So I'm going to distribute this around a little bit. If you all want to share this program, if you like this program and you want to share it with your friends, I would appreciate that. I share it on my personal Facebook page so that my friends from all over the country, whether the time I spend in Tennessee or Alabama or Idaho or Michigan or South Carolina, I want them to have a chance to check in and see what the Dog Nation's all about. This group that I do this chat with is really the best chat group I've ever been a part of. The comments are fun. I think there's a lot of good ideas in there. I think the spirit is great. I think the Georgia fan base is in a really good place right now. I think they're happy with their program, happy with the leadership, and I think everybody has reason to be excited today. It's hard to kind of talk and type out my message. So forgive me for the pauses here, as I'm gonna, as I said, share this across a lot of different forums as we're going to open up the show tonight, because I think we're going to get into some pretty fun stuff and some differences from place to place. You heard me at the onset identify some of the places that are doing it a little bit differently than, Georgia's been open for a while. I think most of the SEC states are open. I don't think that the local and state provisions are going to prevent the SEC from accomplishing what they want to accomplish. And yet still, I do think there's going to be differences from one school to another. I'll share with you in a moment a conversation that I had with Greg McGarity tonight. I see because there's some people out there, and I do understand that there's going to be some naysayers, and I do understand that that there's going to be some concerns out there amongst people as far as the return of college football and players being on campus. See, I'm going to share this. We've got an Athens page. I'm going to share this in the Athens community page. And because the folks in Athens, obviously, Georgia football is central to the community. But going back to Wednesday this week. Okay, so let me go ahead. I've shared this a few different places. Let me go back to Wednesday when the NCAA Division I Council, which is made up of like 40 members, they were the ones that voted to lift the moratorium. You remember that there was supposed to be no on-campus activity through May 31st. So the first step in what's really been a historic week as we return from the COVID-19 crisis, the first step was for this NCAA Council to go ahead and lift that moratorium. And that cleared it up for the different conferences to start on-campus activity as early as June 1st. They didn't say whether that was a unanimous vote or anything like that, but they did say this 40-member council agreed to this, and that is what kind of opened the door and set up the vote today from the SEC League presidents and apparently the Big 12 presidents. So it started on Wednesday when this happened, and we all kind of anticipated that SEC schools would be back. Some thought June 1st. We'd heard June 1st and June 15th, and Greg McGarity had told us, and I shared it with you, hey, there's a lot of dates on the board, and sure enough, they went with June 8th, which I think that's a happy medium. It's a compromise. It certainly gives schools time to get their policies in place and prepare for the students coming back on campus. So you remember at the start of the show, I don't know if you all were listening, or if you were on here yet, but the coaches aren't going to be overseeing these workouts. It's going to be the strength and conditioning coach. So at Georgia, it's Scott Sinclair. And the strength and conditioning coaches are going to oversee these workouts. It's going to be a very gradual build-up for these student athletes. Remember, they've been off, really, March 12th is kind of when the curtain came down on all this. Hard to believe. What is that, March, April, May? Almost 2.5 months ago that this whole thing froze up. I was in Nashville for the SEC basketball tournament. Georgia had won an 18-point game over Ole Miss, and the Dogs were getting ready to tangle with Florida the next day. And that night of March 11th is when the Utah Jazz player was found to have COVID-19, and the NBA announced they were suspending their season. And when that happened, and Greg Sankey was asked about it, he just found out about that 15 minutes before. Remember, the SEC was going to play games without people in attendance. And I'm thinking to myself, man, there is no way. If the NBA is not playing, there's no way this thing's going forward. So I kind of reflect back on March 12th, and I don't know, some of you, what were you doing? What were your thoughts? How much did we really know? It was just this mysterious, invisible enemy. It still is, but I feel like we're further along. I don't want to say yet that I feel in control of the situation. I don't, but I do feel like more people are taking measures. I feel like that, as a whole, our country flattened the curve. Again, I live in Georgia, so, things might be different for me than where you sit, and I want to be sensitive to that. But in this state, at this point, things have worked out better than maybe some thought at this point. Now, again, I don't want to be insensitive because this has touched people. In the county that I live in, there's a nursing home that have had quite a few cases. Now, they don't count the cases in the county. They count where the people are from. So not everyone has had the good fortune that we've had here. So anyway, moving forward, diving back into sports. So Wednesday, that decision comes down. And then Friday, today, we have the vote of the league president. So you might be asking, well, where does that leave Georgia exactly? Because Georgia's made some statements. Kirby came out with some statements. McGarity, the athletic director, came out with some statements. Ron Corson is a really important guy. I want to tell you about Ron Corson here. I want to just detour for a minute. This sounds like boring stuff, but it's really integral to how Georgia handles the pandemic, and it's integral to recruiting. And, is it irony? Is it a coincidence? I saw my friend and Dwan Mathis's father, Terrence Mathis, pop up in here earlier. Good evening, Terrence. I don't know if we celebrate this day. I know we celebrate Dwan Mathis, but it was this day, May 22nd, a year ago, that Dwan Mathis, had a bad headache and went to Ron Corson at Georgia. And Georgia's director of medicine didn't fool around. He didn't say, here's 2 aspirin, go lay down. They rushed him to Piedmont. and they found out that Dwan had a cyst on his brain. And you'll remember that Dwan had the emergency surgery. That was May 22nd. That was 1 year ago. And here we are a year later, and Ron Corson is the director of medicine, has been at Georgia since 94, 95. He did some stuff with the Olympics. And he's the guy that's setting the policy now for these players to come back and how they're going to handle the COVID-19 crisis. So, on the outside, what does this got to do with football? Well, if you're a parent and if you're Georgia and you're recruiting and you say, buy into us, it's not just what's on the field, okay? It's the doctor, it's people like Ron Corson. It's saying, hey, we have one of the best trainers in the world, and the proof is in the pudding. And, had Ron not acted as quickly as he did, had Georgia not supported Dwan Mathis through his rehab the way they have, would that happen anywhere and everywhere? I'm not so sure, but I know this. I know that the family feels very strongly about their relationship with Kirby Smart and Ron Corson. And I know Dwan Mathis is still here in an age when you might go, wow, they just brought in a graduate transfer. They've recruited Carson Beck. And Dwan Mathis chose to spend the time off right here in Athens so that he could continue being treated by Ron Corson. So, if you're a parent and you send your kid away, and I'm sure some of you have, the thought is, I got to really trust this school. I got to trust the coach. I got to trust the position coach. I got to trust the community. And you sure as heck got to trust the doctors to make sure that they're going to take care of your son or your daughter, right, when you send them away to school. And so that's why having a guy like Ron Corson is so important to Georgia, especially at a time like now. And there's Terrence Mathis right there weighing in. You all see it for yourself. Dwan Mathis's father can tell you firsthand, what an incredible journey his son has been on and the support that he's gotten from Georgia. To me, that speaks volumes. That means more than anything as a parent to me. And I know it's meant a lot to the Mathis family. And now we see Ron Corson, who's setting the transition outline in place. So I want to go over some of these rules with you. I want to get to something that I guess it was Athlon that picked Florida ahead of Georgia. I want to get to that in a minute, and I want to talk about why so many people are jumping on this Florida bandwagon, because more and more fans and more media are starting to pick Florida to win the East. And I'll get to that in just a second, but I want to go over these provisions that are going to happen at Georgia as far as the voluntary workouts now that the players are getting back on campus. So first and foremost, of course, the focus is on health and safety. You've heard that a lot from Greg Sankey. You heard it from the NCAA on Wednesday. You heard it again from Sankey today. You heard it from Greg McGarity. So the health and the safety of the players is first and foremost. Taking a collaborative approach, the SEC actually put together a task force that studied all this, and they used the medical professionals from around the Southeastern Conference. This task force has put together the blueprint that these schools are using to ease these kids back in amid the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, this is, like I said, this is historic. This has never happened again. This is unprecedented. Let's all pray it doesn't, happen moving forward. But they put together a blueprint. Ron Corson, right in the middle of this. Georgia will conduct COVID testing and perform medical evaluations on all student athletes. So I've seen some folks out there. When I say some folks, I've seen some other media members that have said not all SEC schools. They took the provisions that the SEC put out there and they said, oh, is this how it's going to be? Well, the SEC didn't specify that every school had to do the transition the same. The SEC put some guidelines out there. The SEC did not specify COVID testing for all athletes in their broad-based guidelines. But at Georgia, in Georgia's guidelines, it's going to happen here. I'm reading it right here, what Ron Corson wrote. So, not every school is the same. We know that. There are some general provisions. It's just like the alcohol policy last year. Remember that? When some schools started selling alcohol and the SEC said, okay, we're going to leave it up to you guys, but you got to follow A, B, C, D, E, F, and G as a minimum. And that's what's happening here, is there's going to be a minimum that these schools are going to have to do to ensure the safety of the student athletes. But I want to be very clear that Georgia, according to their outline, will be doing the COVID-19 testing on all the athletes. Georgia also, this is another time, folks, where if you're a Georgia fan or a Georgia parent, This is when you're happy you're at Georgia, because as we look around the country and we're seeing coaches on furloughs and we're seeing programs cut and you wonder if there's corners being snipped, Georgia with the $105 million reserve fund, this is the planning of the forefathers that goes all the way back to when Coach Dooley was the athletic director. Georgia has been planning. Georgia has been conservative. So right now, here's Georgia, when only 41% of the FBS schools have any reserve fund at all. Here's Georgia with $105 million and a plan that I'm looking at that doesn't cut any corners. Okay? So the value of the Georgia football scholarship is greater than the value of a scholarship somewhere else. Why? Because of the money that they have saved up, the fact that they don't have to cut any corners, the fact that they can afford to test every one of these athletes, and because they have a guy like Ron Corson, the guy that saved Juan Mathis' life. You saw the father, Terrence, in here earlier. The guy that's a big part of this task force in the SEC. He's right here at Georgia. That's a resource. Okay, and if you're a parent, you need to know that. You want to know that, right? Scott Sinclair. So, Scott Sinclair. Hopefully all of you know who Scott Sinclair is. If you don't, I'm going to fill you in. So, we know how important Kirby Smart and his staff is. Unbelievably important. Obviously, Kirby is the guy that's hanging the moon. Kirby is the guy that's given Georgia national championship hopes. Kirby is the reason that the McGill Society has donated so much money. Kirby is the reason that there's an $81 million football building under construction right now as we speak. But Scott Sinclair is the strength and conditioning coach. And there's only certain times of the year that the football coaches are able to oversee these players. And certainly it's very important that coaches, and particularly position coaches, have relationships with their players, right? But the strength and conditioning coach is probably the second most important person on a football staff, because they are with the players the entirety of the year, and particularly during the offseason. Now, Scott Sinclair has had to create programs for these players to train, to take care of themselves. Georgia is a school that watches the players' weights closely. Kirby recruits to that. Similar to what Alabama does. There's a blueprint, there's an idea for how big and the specs that they want at certain positions, the speed. Scott Sinclair is the guy that makes sure that all these Ferraris and Lamborghinis that Georgia has on their football team, make sure they're all tuned up, right? And when these players come back for the voluntary workouts, it's going to be Scott Sinclair and his staff that are going to be overseeing these guys from June 8th until June 30th. And I think we would all agree that's going to be pivotal. What happens between June 8th and June 30th is going to set the table for July. And it's going to be up to Scott and his staff to make sure that these Georgia players are back on their diets, that they're healthy, that they're training, that they don't injure themselves from training. Very important that they ease back into this. Most of them have not been in the gym. They don't have access. Gyms have been closed around the country. So this is going to be a very important part. So to me, when you win a national championship, it's been said, I believe there's a large degree of this that's true, that championships can be won in the offseason, right? Or maybe a better way to say it is, maybe championships can't be won in the offseason, but they can be lost in the offseason, right? If you lose players, if guys get suspended, if key guys get injured. But you got to make sure that you take care of yourself. You got to make sure when you come back to campus, you're in shape. Some of you might have saw Eli Wolf when we had him on here a few weeks ago. He said this year more than ever, it's going to be up to these players to manage themselves. The team that wins the championship this year is going to be the team that manages this crisis the best. So step one was March, April, and half of May. Well, really March, April, May. These student athletes have had to go home and take care of themselves. I know some of you have seen Jamari Salyer. You know, who's Jamari Salyer? Well, hopefully you know, but if you don't, I think he's being counted on to be the left tackle. And I suppose it was about a month or a month and a half ago, I saw a video. Jamari looked heavy. And I said, hey, Jamari, he looks heavy. People said, oh my gosh, why? I said, well, look, you know what? Jamari Salyer, the last week and a half, he's continued training with Andrew Thomas, right? The top pick of the New York Giants, number 4 pick overall. Let me tell you, Jamari Salyer looks good. He got on a scale, and he put a picture of it on Twitter, you know, and it was 312, and you went, wow, this guy is tight. How important is this? That Georgia's players putting up these workouts. Have you seen the Nolan Smith jump rope video? You know, how important is that to see how these guys are training and staying in shape, They're kind of putting the peer pressure on one another. Monty Rice putting his video out there challenging these other guys. Travon Walker. I've seen Justin Schaefer video. I've seen George Pickens running on the beach. Recently this week we saw Jamie Newman working out with Justin Fields, right? And quarterback coach Quincy Avery right there in Atlanta. Emory Jones, the Florida quarterback, was there too. So, these guys have relationships off the field. But back to the point, seeing these players working out, putting that pressure. Tommy was injured last year, had the groin injury. He looks great this offseason. Talking with Terrence Edwards about these young receivers. Jermaine Burton working out with him. So important that Jermaine Burton comes in, ready to rock and roll. One of those freshman receivers on the perimeter. Got to see what he's going to do. Terrence Edwards believes he's going to be a great. Demetrius Robertson. Did you guys see the tweet from Demetrius Robertson yesterday or Wednesday when the NCAA announced June 1st? He put the guy speeding back to. You see the enthusiasm from the players. That is so important. That's our gauge. And that's communicating to us. That's them reaching out and telling us, not just media, but telling their fans, we can't wait to get back and play for you. And that's where Georgia's at right now. A lot of these guys punted the NFL. Richard LeCount could have gone to the NFL. Eric Stokes could have gone to the NFL. We've seen some workout video of him. Monty Rice, Malik Herring, another guy. These are all players that right now could have more than $1 million in their bank account and be preparing for the NFL minicamps. And they came back to Georgia. And that's going to make this defense special. And yet and still, I read the Athlon preview. And listen, I wrote for Athlon for, 20-some years, right? I used to do the previews for Tennessee and Michigan State and Alabama, and I know those guys, and they're great. It is a great operation. It's based in Nashville, but they like Florida. They've got Florida ranked ahead of Georgia, and that, my antennas went up. When Danny Cannell said it last week, I just said, well, that's Danny Cannell, right? Danny Cannell is going to have an opinion. Sometimes, he looks for the opposite opinion, and that's just Danny. And I like Danny's opinions, and I think he's right sometimes. So I'm not dogging Danny Cannell. I want to be clear on that because I respect people that have different opinions and back it up. Danny's logic didn't wash for me as well as Athlon's did. Now I don't agree with Athlon. I want to be clear on that. I don't expect Florida to finish ahead of Georgia. I want to be very clear on that. But their rationale was better than Danny Cannell's. Danny Cannell pointed out, that Georgia's got questions on the offensive line, that Georgia, maybe Jamie Newman's not as good as everybody thinks, blah, 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 blah. And in Florida with all this, okay, Florida's got questions too. Okay, Florida's got questions on their offensive line. I don't know who Florida's running back is. Their skill position guys don't scare me. The Georgia defense is going to be better. The Florida offense, at best, will match last year. Kyle Trask is back. I do think he's a good quarterback. But, man, Florida didn't get in the end zone until the fourth quarter after Georgia called out the dogs. And I know Kirby said the defense wasn't that different, but it was enough different that I saw DBs lining up further off the ball. And, going through three quarters, Florida had negative yardage rushing and 175 total yards offense and only 3 points on the scoreboard. So why do I think that Florida is going to score any more on Georgia this year than they did last year? I don't think that at all. But Athlon Sports' logic was, if you look at the schedule, and the schedule is kind of, it kind of irks me because this is kind of unfair. And Andrew, I see your question about Florida, Tennessee, and I'll get to that in just a minute. I'll open this thing up for questions in just a minute, but I want to get through the narrative here. Florida plays LSU and Ole Miss from the West, and Georgia plays Auburn and Alabama. So granted, I do believe Florida has an easier draw with Ole Miss and LSU than Georgia does with Alabama and Auburn. But I'm going to say this. I'm going to say Alabama, Auburn, LSU, I kind of put them in a hat. If you ask me to predict the order of finish, I actually think Auburn is better. I'm actually taking Auburn over Alabama this year. Could be wrong. We'll wait and see. But Auburn, Alabama to me, and then LSU, just a slight touch below. And then Ole Miss. Now, I don't know how far down you think Ole Miss is. Lane Kiffin is a guy that can coach them up, but I don't know if he can manage them. That's, my experience covering Lane Kiffin a guy that can do the X's and O's, but what sort of manager is he? Remember we were talking earlier about how good do you feel as a parent with where your kid's at? I think you feel a lot better with your kid at Georgia than at Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin. I'll just throw that out there, right? Take what you want from it. So, but even if you say that Florida goes 2-0 against Ole Miss and LSU, and Georgia goes 1-1 against Alabama and Auburn, you say, okay, well, that gives Florida a half a game advantage. If Georgia beats Florida head-to-head, they got the tiebreaker. So even if you're on board with the Athlon philosophy that Georgia's going to split between Alabama, Auburn, and Florida's going to go 2-0, you've still got to believe that Florida is going to beat Georgia head-to-head, or you think Georgia's going to lose another SEC East game. By my count, Georgia has won 18 out of their last 19 SEC games against the Eastern Division. And of those 18 wins, I believe at least 15, if not 16, have been by double digits. Now, some people are going to, well, Mike, they lost to South Carolina. Okay, they did. They did, and somebody probably got struck by lightning somewhere today. But remember what it took for Georgia. I know you don't want to remember what it took for Georgia to lose, but for the sake of this discussion and for the sake of our rationales, we try to explain to these crazy Gator fans why they're wrong. It took 4 Georgia turnovers and 2 missed field goals. And, 3 overtimes? I mean, that's just not going to happen again. It's going to be 25 years before maybe 50. In fact, it probably won't even happen again in our lifetime that a top 5 Georgia team will lose in Sanford Stadium to an unranked team. It won't happen again in our lifetime. It won't. I just cannot see it. You know why I say that? Because it had never happened before. Ever. It had never happened before at Sanford Stadium. It's not going to happen again in our lifetime. You want to know what a fluke is? That's a fluke. No offense to Will Muschamp. I know there's a lot of dog fans that love Will. He is a likable guy. I know him and Kirby are good buddies. Don't want to take anything away from Will. Fact of the matter is, that win probably saved his job because they stunk after that. They got so beat up in that game. Remember, the quarterback got knocked out. I don't think did the running back get knocked out? That was a physical football game. I mean, they walked away with a win, but oh boy, did they feel it. This is not green tea tonight. Full disclosure, it is mint peppermint tea, decaffeinated. It's 9:21. Last week I got a little too wound up. We went late. I couldn't sleep all night. I said, you know what? I got to give something up. I either got to give up the show or I got to give up the green tea. I decided I was going to give up the green tea. I want to talk football. That's what we do. All right, let's look at comments here. You guys have been patient. I appreciate it. If you've got questions about the schools that are coming back, about some of the provisions, if you got questions about the Justin Fields, Jamie Newman quarterback trainer, I talked to Quincy Avery this week. Questions about Matt Stafford, you name it, it's all aboard here. Andrew Ray said South Carolina lost to Tennessee last year. Andrew, one of the things I've noted about the SEC is sometimes it's when you play teams. When do you catch them? For example, in 2018, Georgia in November, after they lost to LSU, in the month of November in 2018, I absolutely believe Georgia was the best team in college football in the month of November. I mean, they absolutely ran over a very good Kentucky defense. They beat the heck out of Florida, dominated Auburn. They were rolling, man. Had Alabama beat, right, in the SEC. Georgia was as good as anybody. But when they played LSU, man, you just got the feeling. It just, from the jump, Georgia didn't look sharp. So when do you catch a team? Andrew Ray's a Tennessee fan. Yes, Tennessee beat South Carolina, but they lost to Georgia State. So what did it have to do? Well, Tennessee got some momentum. They were playing better. They won their last 6 games. But then in September, they're losing to BYU and Georgia State. So maybe if Tennessee plays South Carolina in September, they lose. And if they play Georgia State in November, they win. That is how it works, okay? Because teams have injuries. Sometimes teams get better. Sometimes teams get worse. I thought Georgia, and this is kind of a paradox of sorts. You say that this doesn't even make sense. I'm about to say something that doesn't make sense. Mike Gay's asking about Jordan Davis. All reports on Jordan that I've heard have been good. You may know something I don't, but he was one of the guys that had a very strong off-season going in. But I've not heard any reports. That's interesting. But so this isn't going to make sense here. But Georgia got worse last year, and yet they finished 12-2 and number 4 in the country. That was coaching. It was coaching, and it was leadership. Georgia, when they lost Lawrence Cager, I've got this statistic. I keep it on my page. I've got one of these pages people laugh at because, like, you're supposed to have folders and your screen is supposed to be clean, and mine's really not. I have all these pictures and files up, and I'm sure there's a more orderly way to do it, but I've got the messy desktop on my lap screen. I'm that guy, right? Jake Fromm, with Lawrence Cager on the field, 76% completions with Lawrence Cager. Without him, 52%. So how important was Lawrence Cager? He was incredibly important. And you might say, well, it had to do with the comp. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. You saw how good Georgia was against Florida with Lawrence Cager on the field, 12 of 18 on third down conversions. Lawrence Cager, 7 catches, 132 yards, the back-breaking 52-yard touch. How important was Lawrence Cager to Georgia? Oh, my goodness. And how much more important would J.J. Holloman have been if he were still with the team, right? So you take those guys away, you go, oh, that's a different team. If you got J.J. Holloman and Lawrence, now they can't double cover George Pickens. Oh, my goodness. Think about that. What if Kyrus Jackson doesn't break his hand in the first game? He was starting. What if Demetrius Robertson doesn't pull? So a lot of it has to do with when you play a team. Tennessee, 2016. It'll be on my grave. Tennessee fans still kill me for it. They say, you thought Butch Jones was a good coach. Darn right I did. They were in the top 10 in 2016. You got amnesia, man? They beat Virginia Tech in the Battle of Bristol. They come from 21-3 down and beat the Gators. They beat Georgia and Kirby and won an unbelievable game. Nobody wants to remember it here. Got it. But they start out 5-0 and they're in the top 10. Let me tell you, they set a signal. But then what happens? Well, Jalen Hurd, he has that incident, where he's kind of fuzzy, gets a concussion against Georgia, doesn't travel to A&M. And they lose 5 defensive linemen, and they lose their All-SEC linebacker, and they lose their All-SEC cornerback, and their 5-star wide receiver Preston Williams quits the team. Then Jalen Hurd quits the team. Then Alvin Kamara gets hurt, and all of a sudden they're losing to Vanderbilt, losing out on a Sugar Bowl bid. The 2-year extension that Butch Jones would have got disappears, and he starts the next season on the hot seat with everybody carrying torches, and they're ready for him to go. That's how fast things can change. That's how different of a team Tennessee was. They go from coming down from 21-3 down to beat Florida to losing to Vanderbilt at the end of the year. So much of it has to do with where you catch a team. Furthermore, another point I picked up, and I learned this very late. It's funny, Andrew, talking about Butch Jones being a bad coach. Tell me when you guys go to win 3 straight bowl games and finish in the top 25 in back-to-back years. Tell me when it happens again. I think that's going in that direction, but it hadn't happened in 10 years, and the bowl streak hadn't happened in 20. So I thought he was a good coach. I didn't think he managed things well, but that's where I'm going to leave the Butch Jones discussion for tonight. He was there for 5 years, and that's about average. And so there you go. That's it for Butch Jones in that conversation. But getting back to Georgia and what Georgia was able to do this last season, the Baylor victory meant so much for Georgia football because it was a chance for the Bulldogs to show that Kirby Smart had learned a lesson, right? And I don't want to be condescending here because Kirby Smart is a hell of a coach. It's not like he's only a 5th year. No. This guy's 44 years old, okay? He can fly a jet airplane. He's smart. He's intelligent. His IQ is through the roof. But I think that college football changes every year, the dynamics of it. And one of the recent changes that nobody had experience with was the transfer portal. And Georgia had one heck of a transfer portal situation on its hands, right? Remember that? So there's Justin Fields going to the transfer portal, but wanting to go to the bowl game. Kirby wants to keep Justin Fields. He's hoping Fields will change his mind. So he says, come on, Justin Fields, you can come. Luke Ford, right, the 5-star tight end from Illinois, they want to keep him too. So you got a couple guys in Ford and Fields that are planning on leaving the program that are on the bowl trip. Then you got DeAndre Baker. You got the DeAndre Baker situation. Here's your All-American. Here's your Thorpe Award winner. Kid from Miami. About ready to strike it rich in the NFL. He wants to go on the bowl trip. So Kirby says, well, he's a senior. If it wasn't for DeAndre, we probably wouldn't be here. So you bring DeAndre Baker. So you got two guys wanting to transfer. You got DeAndre Baker there who's ready for, the big time. And then you've got a team that is just livid because their goal was snatched away from them. Should have never happened. And Oklahoma's AD on the college football playoff committee. Georgia gets left out. They think this is a bunch of bull stuff because they just played the number one team in the country within a touchdown. They play Alabama tougher than anybody. Nobody even got within 22 or 23, and Georgia had Alabama on the ropes. And now they're not one of the top four teams, even though they just took this historically dominant team down to the last play, down to the 38-yard line, with Georgia having the ball and a chance to tie. Suddenly, why? Because Oklahoma's offense is number one, but their defense is 100 and whatever. And this committee, this committee of experts says so. I mean, come on, man. And so these Georgia players, these guys, I watched them all summer. I told you what it's like over there. I told you what it's like standing over there, watching these guys come in from the field. I almost feel guilty standing in the air conditioning. They got on full equipment. Their pads, the sweat's pouring off them. They got grass and dirt all over them coming out of their ears. You can hear Kirby yelling at them for 2.5 hours. It's 95 degrees. You're going, holy cow, this is unbelievable. This reminds me of my basic training days in the military where I just want to go home, but I can't go home. Can't go home. No chance. Got to have the honor. Got to make it through it. These guys, peer pressure, these guys have been focused all year, and their goal gets taken away because you got some committee that has a Big 12 AD on there, and his school's a part of it. Well, he had to leave the room when Oklahoma was talked about. Oh, well, did he have to leave the room when Georgia was talked about? No. Okay. Remember, the Ohio State AD said, I'm out. He was upset the Buckeyes didn't get in. So he just quit. This committee, that got me started on the 13-member committee. Throw this thing out. I talked to Roy Kramer about it last summer. He was inducted in the Lansing Hall of Fame. And I'm sure most of you know who Roy Kramer is. He was the SEC commissioner. He was the founder of the BCS. Roy Kramer was the man who came up with the East and West Division and the league champion. He's a visionary. He's a legend. And I asked him about the BCS. And what do you think about the committee? He said, we went with the BCS and we took the humans out of the equation because we wanted to avoid regionalism. Yes, as we all know, there is regional bias in college football. Always has been, always will. Human nature. I made that case last year. People, Feinbaum's acting like I'm telling them that the earth is flat or something when I'm saying that people are biased. What? Really? What do you say that? Who are you accusing anyone of? I'm accusing them of being human beings. I'm saying if you work at Oklahoma, you want your team in the playoff. So don't tell me you're gonna bend over backwards to keep your team out. You're absolutely not gonna do that. No chance. You're gonna discriminate whether you mean to or not, subconsciously. We're human beings. We do that. Wasn't Georgia Tech AD on there? Yes, they were, Mike Gay. Yes, the Georgia Tech AD was on the college football playoff committee. Wasn't the Florida AD on there? Yes, he was on the college. How about that? So Georgia Tech and Florida, two of the rival schools, had ADs on the committee that kept Georgia out. And so did Oklahoma, whose team got in. That's a shocker, isn't it? So anyway, I've talked with Bill Hancock. Margaret Brooks wants to know, am I married? No, I'm not. Why? Because nobody could probably stand me. This is only football talk. Just so you know, football is what does this to me. It's kind of like getting behind the wheel of a fast car. So 2008, I had a friend that owned a car dealership. He told me I had to test drive this BMW M3. Let me tell you, after I drove that car, I had to save up for 3 years to buy one because there was nothing else like it. You get behind the wheel of a fast car. How many of you guys know this, right? Or girls, because listen, I've seen plenty of women with a lead foot. You get in a fast car and you go fast and it changes. It's a game changer. The music goes up, the windows go down, right? You sit up a little bit firmer in the seat. I had to drive back to Tennessee see my relatives not too long ago, and it was a shorter. I went through these mountains, man. I said, man, this is just like a video game. And then I said, you know what? But if I crash, it's going to hurt, and it'll really mess up my insurance. So, but does that stuff not happen? Okay, that happens to me with football or with caffeine. But tonight, there's no caffeine. So it's not the caffeine, it's not the green tea, it's college football. Andrew Ray wants to know my take on Mike Leach at Mississippi State. You know, I've been making an effort to be more positive. My boss, I've got a great boss. His name is BJ Sweeney. He probably said, don't say my name, but that's his name. And BJ has been great for me. BJ was the one that said, hey, smile more. I thought, do I not smile enough? So I started smiling more. It was the best advice I'd gotten from any boss, probably in 3 decades. So I smile more now. But BJ's also, hey, let's try and be positive. Let's look at the glass being half full. Sorry, BJ. When it comes to Mike Leach, I'm not going to be positive. Okay, because I think it's a complete and utter failure. And I could be wrong. I could be very wrong. If Mike Leach wins the West and leads Mississippi State to greatness, I will raise my hand and I will say, you know what? I was wrong about Mike Leach. But let me tell you what. I don't think this guy fits. I think we've seen that with some of his comments on Twitter. He suddenly went underground. Everybody's like, oh, Mike Leach, he's a pirate. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, you get some comments once out of a month. Listen, that dog and pony show, that don't fly in the SEC. You can be as funny as you want, but you better win games. And I don't think that Mike Leach can protect his quarterback, and I don't think he can win games. And I see Greg Dobbs there, and he lives in Washington. Greg, I want you to give me an opinion. Greg is a former state championship high school quarterback that I covered in Idaho Falls. He's now my Edward Jones guy, and he's going to give... Greg, put your opinion down on Mike Leach at Mississippi State right now, because Greg is a guy that I covered in high school as a high school quarterback, and he's a pretty smart guy. I think Mike Leach is going to be a failure. Hi, Greg. Give me your opinion on Mike Leach. You live in Washington. You follow the Cougars. I thought, okay, he did okay. But can he win in the SEC, Greg? I don't think so. Because of the schedule. Because he's got to play Alabama. Because he's got to play Auburn. Because he's got to play LSU. Because Lane Kiffin's in the same state. And nobody can out Lane Kiffin on the recruiting trail. So there's 4 strikes. There's 4 losses. 3 at least. And he's got a crossover game with Florida, by the way. I don't see Mike Leach winning 10 games a year. And that is the key, as Greg Dobbs just told you. Do we believe that Mike Leach is going to get talent and out-recruit Lane Kiffin, Nick Saban, Ed Orgeron, and Gus Malzahn? Do we believe that? I don't believe that. So that's why I say Mike Leach is going to fail, and fail on a big stage, because he's in the spotlight. Everybody loves him. Like I said, he won the press conference. Everybody's excited. But now somebody says the arms race means more in the West. I'm going to make an argument there. I think the SEC East is on the comeback trail. I think that Tennessee is on the way up. I know that Georgia's on the way up. And I think Florida and Dan Mullen will probably do better. I don't think Florida and Dan Mullen are going to conquer Kirby anytime soon. But I think that Florida is getting, stabilized. I think we're going to see some stability there at Florida. I know that Tennessee is moving in the right direction. The recruiting class is a little bit smoke and mirrors. I've talked about that. All you got to do is look at the player rating, not trying to hate on the Vols, getting early commitment. I think that's a good strategy for Tennessee. I think there's a plan there. I'm not doubting them. I know those guys. I covered those guys. I covered Team Martin. I covered Jay Graham. I covered Jeremy Pruitt and Will Friend. I was the beat writer for them. I covered Phil. I know what's going on there, okay? I know those guys are winners. The problem is they've got to catch up to Georgia. And I don't see Kirby letting up. I don't see Georgia failing. I see Georgia getting stronger. This $81 million football building, folks, Georgia is where they are, even though their facility's ranked 8th in the SEC, according to 24/7. Think about that. Question about Kentucky. Will they ever win more than 7 or 8 games? Well, they did a couple years ago, Wyatt. I kind of wonder, honestly, if it'll happen again. I do think, Kentucky's another program that's stable, but, Good's just not good enough. Good. What was that? Good doesn't feed the bulldog. In the SEC, it's about greatness. I feel like Kentucky had their opportunity a couple years ago in 2018 when they had Georgia at home at Kroger Field in the de facto SEC's championship game. I felt like that was Kentucky's chance. They had a marquee running back. They had a senior-laden defense. But Georgia was just too good. Antoine asking about the Zoom last week we did the Zoom. We're not going to do the Zoom. That was a great test. I want to thank everybody that took part in the Zoom and the insider meeting. We had a lot of fun with that. It was pretty cool. We went face-to-face and one-on-one. That's kind of in the stay tuned phase. We're like everyone else at Dog Nation and AJC and Cox. We're always looking at different ideas and trying different things. That was something we tried. We wanted to see, was there interest? You know what? You guys showed up and showed us there was. So we go, okay, let's file that one away. Let's think about other things that we can do. And we're constantly trying to evolve. We're constantly trying to do more with our Dog Nation crowd. That's what we're all about. You guys know where it starts for us. It starts every day at 10 a.m. with Brandon Adams and Dog Nation. That's our bread and butter. Brandon does a great job as the voice of the fans. I hope you all watch that. I assume most of you do. But every day Brandon's going to kind of give you the buzz and the vibe. And he's back in the studio now. It's really exciting for us. He's got a great program. Kroger does. We really appreciate their sponsorship. And that's kind of where it starts. And then you see Jeff Santel on Wednesday nights. I don't know how many recruiting folks are in here, but, Wednesday nights, Jeff does a show before the hedges. Jeff is as knowledgeable about recruiting, and not just Georgia, but national recruiting, as anybody I've ever run across. And he's probably the most pleasant and likable guy that I've ever run across. He's our glue guy at Dog Nation. Everybody just likes Jeff. He's a creative, fun thinker. Connor Riley now doing a show on Tuesday night. Connor is the guy with the encyclopedic knowledge at his fingertips. You ask Connor a question, he seems like he's answering it before it comes up out of your mouth. So we've got a great staff of people that do things. Michael Carvel, our producer, he doesn't have his own show. You guys might have seen Michael do some production and some trivia. But we've got a great staff of guys that really make it happen. And we're going to keep trying to do more. But it's shows like this, and it's turnouts like this, when you folks get on here and you watch this program, you watch Friday Night Mike, and you hit the share button and you put it on your page, or you share it to another one of your friends that you know is a Georgia fan, that's what comes back to my bosses and our advertisers, and they say, you know what? There's a lot of Georgia fans out here. We want to get behind it, and we want to help them do more. That's just kind of how the wheel turns. So anyway, let's get back to your questions there. It was good to see my friend Greg Dobbs. Said he's won everywhere. Can he get SEC talent? So I think we would all agree with Mike Leach. It comes down to recruiting. And I just don't know if I think he can connect. Another thing I'll throw out there for you. This was a prediction that I had early on in the process, that we might see some older coaches step away. Now, we've seen it in some other sports. We haven't seen it in football yet. But with the numbers, the COVID-19 numbers, with the factions, the risk groups, how much of a disadvantage is a 68-year-old Nick Saban and a 68-year-old Mac Brown? And I don't know Mike Leach's age. Somebody can Google that. I would guess 57. How much of a disadvantage would an older coach be at? Well, number one, I think they're at a disadvantage because the whole recruiting cycle has gone 24/7, 365. I mean, we had Tom Crane on last Monday. And by the way, if you like Georgia basketball, strongly recommend you watch that show. Coach Crane was unbelievable. He went for an hour, and he talked about the failings of last year's team. He talked about the Harbaugh family. But anyway, Coach Crane talked about how now it's a 16-hour-a-day, 365-day job with the transfer portal. And younger coaches and younger people, by and large, not all cases, but most of the time, that age helps. There you go. Thank you, Wyatt. Mike Leach is 59. How much of a disadvantage are they going to be at with the COVID-19 dynamics that we know we're all dealing with here? So that's a question for you all. The travel. I don't know how much of a recruiter Mike Leach is as far as getting on that airplane, but I know that Nick Saban is a tireless worker. We all know about Kirby Smart. I think I told you earlier in this offseason on one of these shows that I felt like the silver lining to this was that Kirby got a much, I thought, needed break, a recharge. I think this was a recharge for Kirby. a chance to get away from things and evaluate from afar. I think the hires have worked out great. I think we all agree that Matt Luke was a slam dunk hire. I think we're all optimistic that Todd Monken is going to work out. I think Matt Luke is, again, I think he's that buffer between Kirby and the strong offensive mind. But that's one of my questions. So I don't want to be age discriminatory here because I'm one of the older guys, okay? But I think there's a reality to it. And I do wonder if the older coaches will be at a disadvantage because of COVID-19. I think that's fair. You're asking me about Scott Cochran making a recruiting impact, Daniel Holtz. That's a great question. I'm going to say yes and no. Because right now, recruiting's kind of shut down. And it's shut down because they want a level playing field. And as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic is in different stages of recovery, if that's the right word, or resocialization with different state statutes from state to state. And so, it wouldn't be fair if you say, well, Georgia's wide open, so all the recruits can go there, but Michigan's not, and so nobody recruits. So what they've done is they've kind of shut it down. Now, I think Scott Cochran makes a difference for recruiting because of his Twitter account, because of his energy, and because of the success that I think he'll have on the field. Ultimately, your best advertisement is what you put on the field on Saturday. Now, it's important. Don't get me wrong, and I talked about this earlier. The infrastructure that's in place, that's being tested right now with these players coming back on campus at Georgia June 8th, what is your director of medicine like? What is the Ron Corson plan? How good are your Georgia facilities? How prepared is the staff to deal with these players? How effective can they be in getting these players prepared for when they get back to actual football training? Which, by the way, conference commissioners have agreed on the middle of July for that. So when we talked earlier, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. When we talked earlier about different schools coming back at different times, right? Nebraska students getting back, or the football players get back June 1st. Iowa, Ohio State, the SEC on June 8th. The Big 12 saying June 15th. That's not uniform, but that's just coming back on campus for training with the strength and conditioning coaches. But when you can actually work with the staff, the report, and I believe it was Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated that said that the conference commissioners are in agreement that the middle, so that's when everything gets uniform. 6 weeks out, middle of July. And the scenario that I've painted for you all, and I still think it's in effect, is that's when the players and the coaches get quarantined. Middle of July, 2-week quarantine period, and then training on August 1st like you would normally. There's been nothing normal to this point. I hesitate to use the word normal, but on the same timeline as before. Let's go back to your questions and comments. You guys are great. You give me a lot of thoughts and ideas. It helps me with stories when I'm trying to think of stories to write every week. It's interesting. I'll have people from around the country. They'll check in with me. Mike, how you doing? What have you been up to? Man, I've been busy. Guys, I've been busy. I'm not kidding. What have you been writing about? What have I been writing about? Man, I'm in Georgia. I'm writing about football every day. I'm writing about, and there is plenty to write about. I still haven't got to the end of my list. I was up at 8 o'clock this morning. I'm going now. I took about an hour and a half walk maybe and a shower. But other than that, it's just been one after another. So I see Joel's ready for the dogs to get ready for a great year. Joel, I'm with you. I think this is going to be a huge season for Georgia. I think this is a year that Georgia can win the national championship. I don't think there's any asterisks about this. I've had some people say, well, will there be an asterisk next to the championship because of blah, blah, blah? I said, you know what? If there is, it's a badge of honor. Because you think about it, now more than ever, football players are having to be accountable for themselves. Now more than ever, programs are having to fight through adversity. Whoever wins this championship will have done it the hard way. Because there is no easy way in college football right now. You look at all the stipulations in place, and I reached out to Greg McGarity earlier tonight, and he said, now comes the hard part, Mike. And I said, yeah, but you've got the best staff and the infrastructure in the country to work with, and he agreed with that. But now does come the hard part. We're all having to put out. Now we start to ask, well, who's going to be at the games? How many fans are going to be at the games? How are we going to do this? Is there going to be tailgating? Will there be concession stands? Will there be visitor tickets available? Will it be 20% capacity? Will it be 50% capacity? Will there be temperature checks? How are we going to go about? Will there be masks? I mean, there's all these questions. We've just taken the first step with the date being announced when the student athletes can return to campus. We're just starting to dip our toe in the water. William Gleaton wants to know, how much of an influence does Luke have on the play calling? William, I can kind of give you a big framework answer. I can't give you a precise answer because I think that's yet to be determined. But generally speaking, what happens on coaching staffs is that throughout the course of the week, they divvy up the scouting responsibilities, typically. Now, Georgia may do it differently, but there's usually someone in charge of the scout. And Georgia has a base of plays, right? You got your base plays. This is our bread and butter. You know, these 10 runs, these 10 passes, you know, come hell or high water, they're going to be in the playbook that week. And then each week you tailor the game plan to fit your personnel, who's healthy, who's not, who's playing good, and the other team, where is their weakness. So you've got your group of base plays that are always there, and then you kind of tinker with the other plays. In Georgia's case, you know, just listening to Kirby Smart talking at his coach's clinic, or reading, you know, second or fourth and goal every day, the book about Alabama and the model, and, you know, Kirby does some similar things there. You have your answer plays. There's certain plays you go, you know what? Against this team in this situation, we know they're going to do this, and we're going to have this play ready. So, for example, 3rd and 7 against Florida last year in the Swamp, talking to Eli Wolf, they knew that play to Eli was going to be there. Now, they still had to execute it. Florida blitz, Jake still had to make a great throw. Eli still had to elevate and make a good catch, but they knew that play would be there. And that was an answer play, and they saved those plays for certain. But that is determined throughout the course of the week. So the coaches work together. It's a staff decision. It's not one guy like, hey, you're the offensive coordinator. You go over there, drop all the plays and call them. That's not how it works. All the coaching staff gets together. They all have input, and they massage this game plan. You know, maybe you think this is going to be a play. Maybe you put it in on Tuesday, and you go out there, and Kirby goes, nah, man, I ain't feeling it. I don't like the look of it. Or maybe Monken says it, or maybe Luke goes, no, you know. Or maybe Luke says, you know what? We had a play like this at Ole Miss, but instead of this, we did that with this particular, you know. So that's where I think Matt Luke makes a difference. We know he's a trusted confidant of Kirby Smart. Someone asked me about the breakout player this season. Charles Kaiser. Hey, Charles. Good to see you in here, man. Breakout player. I wrote a story about James Cook. I think James Cook is a breakout player just because of the nature of the offense. George Pickens already had his breakout last year. We know he's pretty great. I think he'll be the primary receiver. I'm not quite as sure about who the number 2 wideout is yet. Still not sure about tight ends. We know Monken likes to use tight ends based on his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But James Cook, to me, because he's a guy that does great in space. And what do we hear from Kirby all the time? Want to get guys in space. Want explosive plays. James Cook has home run speed. James Cook has the ability to make people miss in the open field. I thought James Cook was underutilized last year. So James Cook is my breakout player. Now, I thought he might be a breakout last year. I didn't think that Jake looked for him too much. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes in practice, but if the offseason is an indicator, Kirby identified James Cook as one of the top 5 offseason workers. That's a big plus for you. And you see the workout videos, and you see James Cook's brother, Dalvin Cook, running back with the Minnesota Vikings. You see him back home in South Florida because of COVID-19 now. These brothers are spending more time together. I think that's a big plus for James Cook. I think it's a big plus for Kenny McIntosh. I don't know how many of you know this, but Kenny has an older brother named RJ who is in the NFL, a defensive line with the New York Giants. And RJ's been home. And Kenny also has a brother named Dion that was a running back at Washington State under Mike Leach last year. And Dion is back home. Dion was at Notre Dame also. So Kenny McIntosh got those big brothers around pushing him, just like James Cook. They're working out down there in South Florida. I think that helps. Not everybody has. Now, I do think the Georgia players, and I said this earlier, I do think the Georgia players have had a very good as possible off-season under the circumstances based on what we've seen them put out on. You look at these guys on video, you're like, this guy looks great. Jamari Seller, he looks like $1 million. Eric Stokes looks like he's ready to run track in the Olympics. James Cook, this guy looks like he's ready to burn. Samir White, right? He's a workout warrior. We always see Samir post those videos. Kenny McIntosh has looked good. Carson Beck throwing the ball in Florida. I don't know how many of you saw that. Carson looked great. The video of Jamie Newman that we ran earlier this week, if you get a chance, go to Dog Nation. We got the story. We got video of Jamie Newman and Justin Fields working out together over there outside of Atlanta with Quincy Avery, the quarterback trainer. So I think these guys look great. Andrew Ray's predicting Matt Landers will be the number 3 wide receiver. I saw Mike Gay said he's rooting for him. I would like to see Matt Landers have a big season. Matt Landers has prototypical NFL size. He's a guy that has had his struggles with Kirby. And when you have when Kirby Smart calls you out in the media, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because it means that he knows you have great potential. It means that he wants to get more out of you. He wouldn't even mention your name if he didn't care. So the fact that Kirby Smart has leaned on Matt Landers, and he's told us, Matt Landers is a guy that's made some plays. He's kind of teased you, right? He makes the sensational catch, but then he's had some drops. I thought Matt Landers finished last year on a really strong note. The other thing I would say, being around the receiving corps, these guys really pull for each other, and they really like Matt Landers. There's a lot of love there for Matt Landers, and that tells me something when the teammates are pulling for Matt Landers. That tells me he's working hard behind the scenes. So, try really hard to get a read on that. I think he'll be pretty good. Darnell Washington on the washing machine. Charles Kaiser saw that. I saw Jeff Santel retweeted that. Really like Darnell Washington. What is he? 6'7", 265. I mean, this guy's got some Godzilla proportions. I've been told this is the best looking tight end recruit of an era. That this is the kind of tight end that comes around once every 25 years. So we know that Todd Monken likes to use the tight end. All you got to do is look at his stats in Tampa Bay. You can see the ball distribution there. Likes the tight ends even a little bit more than the running backs. Don't forget you got Trey McKitty coming in from Florida State. I just don't know enough about McKitty. When I asked Mark Richt about him, and I'm sure most all of you saw, we had Coach Richt on I guess it was about a week ago. This is a guy that Rick considers the quintessential tight end, a guy that can, that checks all the boxes. Can he be dynamic? Can McKitty and Washington step into the shoes of Werner and Wolf? Can they exceed them? Because remember, at the tight end position for Kirby Smart, you got to block. And everybody gets real bored there. Everybody gets real quiet. Oh, boy, we're going to talk about blocking. Listen. If you want to know the difference between DeAndre Swift in 2018 and DeAndre Swift in 2019, it was downfield blocking. DeAndre didn't have the 70 and 80-yard run in 2019 because the downfield blocking wasn't as good. Jason Stanley was very good at downfield blocking. J.J. Holloman was very good downfield blocker. Terry Godwin was very good. Riley Ridley was very good. And as much as you miss the experience and the pass-catching ability of those receivers, you also missed their blocking on the perimeter. That makes a difference, folks. And you know that. The difference between that corner that's there that trips you up and the corner not being there and Swift being off to the races because you ain't catching him from behind. William Gleaton wants to know, can Kirby evolve and let the OC run the offense? You got to understand something, man. Kirby's not the problem. Kirby is the solution. So I'll give you an example of this. People say, you know what? Jake Fromm, he really had good games against Alabama. How about that? Jake Fromm, he really played good. Do you know why he had good games against Alabama? Because the game plan was for him to throw the ball more against Alabama. Why was the game plan for him to throw the ball more against Alabama? Because that's what you needed to do to win. That's how Kirby Smart plays it. Kirby Smart doesn't hate offense. Kirby Smart just hates beating yourself. And if you don't got to throw the ball 35 times, then why throw the ball 35 times? If you can win it pounding and controlling the clock and with defense, that's called percentage football. There's no reason to go out there and throw the ball 45 times against Arkansas State or against Kentucky in a rainstorm for that matter. So it's not that Kirby Smart doesn't understand and like offensive football. He does. He's brilliant. He just understands that there's 3 things that can happen when you throw the football in the air, and 2 of them are bad. Actually 4, and 3 of them are bad. You can get sacked. You can throw an incompletion, or you can throw an interception. But if you've got a mammoth offensive line, and you can take out 4 and 5 chunks on first down and stay ahead of the chains and keep the other team's offense off the field and drive the football and be efficient and only have 2 games where you have interceptions. Because listen, here's the stat. Georgia didn't lose a game when they had DeAndre Swift healthy and less than 4 turnovers. Think about it. Georgia's 2 losses was that fluke game we talked about earlier with 4 turnovers and 2 missed field goals. In the end of the year when they didn't have DeAndre Swift or Lawrence Cager. You know, I reflect back on something Kirby said because he grew a little frustrated because, you know, Kirby loves the Georgia fan base. He's a Georgia Bulldog himself, right? But sometimes he gets frustrated when people don't catch on to this because most people are very knowledgeable about football. It's kind of a given in some, you know, Alabama fans, Georgia fans, Florida fans. You know, if you're a fan of a big-time program, you got a pretty good football IQ because you follow it closely. It's your passion. But Kirby pointed this out after the LSU game. You know, Georgia ran the same patterns. Georgia went 3 and 4 wide. Did you watch the LSU game? They came out throwing. You know, I hate to say it, but, you know, Tyler Simmons drops what should have been a touchdown pass first play of the game. 64, he just drops it. It's wide, it's there. They schemed it up. Coley had the play called. They said, you know what, they're going to come out on this. We're going to do that. He's going to be open. Boom. Jake throws it. Simmons drops it. You know, there's no answer for that. But Kirby says, hey, guys, we're running the same patterns they are. We're calling the same plays. But they don't got LSU receivers. And their guys ain't getting open. So you can call all the plays you want. It seems like he plays not to lose. I don't know. Did it bother you against Kentucky? Did it bother you? You know, we look for the exception to the rule. You know, we remember the games that we lose. Hindsight is 20/20. You know, Kirby's believed in his defense. I think that this particular year, this is all Kirby now, right? This is year 5. So the guys that are in the program have been handpicked by Kirby Smart. They've been handpicked. They've been a part of his culture long enough that when Richard LeCounte or Monty Rice or Eric Stokes or Tyson Campbell or Malik Herring, you know, these guys are all Kirby Smart guys. And he's going to trust them again. Now, that's not to say that the offense isn't going to score points. It's not to say that it's not going to be exciting. I think it will be, especially early on. In past years, with Jake Fromm under center, especially year 2 and 3, you kind of knew what you had with Jake, right? And so you didn't really want to expose Jake to any hits, so you didn't want to be thrown in the fourth quarter, especially last year. Because, you know, people go, why didn't Jake Fromm run more? You really want him to run more? Because if he gets hurt, who's your number 2, right? So Jake Fromm didn't do a whole lot of running. You had to have a somewhat protective scheme to protect your quarterback and ensure that Jake Fromm was going to be there at the end of the year. Because if he wasn't, you weren't beating anybody. You sure as heck weren't going to win a Sugar Bowl. I don't think you beat Florida without Jake Fromm either. So you had to be somewhat conservative with Jake with the RPOs, just because of, you know, you didn't have a real great backup. No offense to Stetson Bennett, but not like having Justin Fields back there, right? If Justin would have come back for his sophomore year. So there's a lot that goes into it, I guess is what I'm saying. And it's just not as simple as Kirby doesn't like offense. He's a defensive coach. Listen, I've covered defensive coaches, and they've won championships. Gene Stallings was a defensive coach, DB. Mark D'Antonio, defensive coach, DB. 2-time, Big Ten champion. So it comes down to execution, guys. Your players have to catch the football. The receivers have to get open. That's the bottom line. Good to see Jonathan Kaysen in here. Appreciate that. Who else we got in here tonight? What other questions do we guys got here before we go? We've hit the 10 o'clock mark. Friday Night Mike, it's always fun to be with you guys. I just can't thank you enough. You keep coming back. And we just kill it in Dog Nation. It's different. I tell people that. You know, I say, you know, doing this show and talking to the Dog Nation fan base, it's not like a general audience. Sometimes you do television, you do radio. You don't really know who's out there listening, but I feel accountable. I see the same names. I see the same people coming in here supporting our product. It makes a difference. I think Nick McReynolds is right. You know, Malik Herring is the highest rated defensive lineman according to Pro Football Focus grades based on last year, Malik Herring is the highest rated defensive lineman returning in the SEC. You know, last year him and Tyler Clark were splitting reps. This year he's going to get pushed by Trevon Walker. So I think Malik Herring and Trevon Walker will have great seasons. That depth really matters. So when you play Georgia in November, good luck, because they have a ton of depth. And that defense, it's talented depth and it's experienced depth. Last year, Georgia, 37 guys with over 100 snaps last year. So pretty interesting here. What else we got here? William Gleaton, you're right. It's all about personnel. And William, to take it one step further, think about how Georgia was built in 2017. Big offensive line, 2 great running backs. You were going to run the ball. In fact, Georgia had the highest run-pass ratio of all the non-option teams in the country. And nobody had a problem with it because they almost won a national title. And yet still, when it was time to step on the gas against Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, they did. Kirby can adjust. He'll show you that. Hey, if you need offense, you got offense. But Kirby's not going to be out there styling like Steve Spurrier, throwing up 69 points just for the heck of it, right? So, but think about how the team was built. You were built with a premium jumbo offensive line package. You had 2 first-round picks as your offensive tackles this year. You know, 330 and 345. These are big dudes, man. These aren't guys designed to get out on the perimeter and sweeps and play in space and spread. These are power football linemen. This is what you've recruited to. This is what your talent tells you can do. Most impressive guy on the field, best skill position player last year. I don't think there's any question. DeAndre Swift, right? So what do? You get the ball to DeAndre Swift. This is really, it's not rocket science. So when William talks about personnel, he's exactly right. The most important thing that's going to happen in the month of July, in addition to the safe return of the players, is that Georgia's going to identify their playmakers. So earlier in the show, you asked me who's going to be the breakout player. I say James Cook. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's Kenny McIntosh. Maybe it's Samir White. Maybe it's Kendall Milton. Maybe it is Jermaine Burton. Maybe it's Marcus Roseme. Maybe it's Darnell Washington. But this is what's going to happen. These coaches are going to lay eyes on these guys, and they're going to go, you know what? I like the way this guy looks. I trust this guy. This guy's catching everything. This guy's not catching anything. And they're going to design their offense around the players. They're going to design their offense around the players that are making plays. And it's like I said, it's really not rocket science. So that's kind of what I look for Georgia next year. I think they're going to design their offense around the playmakers that they have. And I think that's what you should look for as well. And it's going to take a little while before that happens. It's going to take at least the month of July. So that's kind of what I look for. Let me see what other questions that we have here. What else we got here, folks? What do we got here? Can't really see any other ones right now. So let's go back to our Dog Nation page and see what we have. Hope you guys have enjoyed the Friday night show. I hope you guys are having a great Memorial Day weekend, a great start to it. I hear some fireworks. That's exciting. People saying shots fired. I think those are just fireworks down at the end of the street. A festive neighborhood tonight. Antoine Middleton says a one-dimensional quarterback in college football. Got to be able to scramble and make plays. I agree that mobility helps. I think Jake's answer to that was he got out of trouble before he got into it. If you looked at the sack numbers, they were pretty low. Usually he had the answer. He was able to change plays at the line of scrimmage. But ultimately, I would agree, given the choice, you want to have a guy that's got some mobility. Obviously, Joe Burrow was a guy that was able to extend plays at the college level. Kind of skeptical if Joe Burrow's going to be able to do that in the NFL. What else do we got here? There's no question you're going to play. You're going to play Kendall Milton. Kids just don't redshirt anymore. Nowadays, they're almost on a 3-year plan. Always a good time, Mike. I really appreciate the comments. Really kind of you to weigh in with the positive thoughts and the encouragement. We all need it. We all go through it. Sometimes things can be tough. But honestly, this show, for me, is a snap. It's fun. You guys are engaging. It's a historic week. It's been a great week for college football. The NCAA on Wednesday, lifting that moratorium on-campus activity. You're going to see football and basketball players now back on campus at Georgia and in the SEC on June 8th. We know Nebraska is June 1. We know the Big 12 is June 15. We know Ohio State is June 8th. We know Iowa is June 8th. Everybody coming back at different times for the voluntary work. It's pretty exciting to me. People asking, how does Brock Vandegrift affect Carson Beck playing? I don't think it affects anything. These guys come here to compete. Dabo Sweeney, I asked him about it at the national championship a couple years ago when he had, Deshaun Watson was there, and then you had Kelly there as the next. Kelly Bryant was next in line, and Trevor Lawrence, and I said that Dabo, just like we talked to Kirby about this at the SEC spring meetings, what do you do when you've got these great players? He said, well, we don't recruit backups. They come in and they play. That's just how it works. Somebody asked me about a Bulldog hat. Hey, guys, I'm not a Georgia fan. I don't go that far with it. I cover Georgia. I respect Georgia, but I've got to maintain some objectivity. I respect the people I cover. Certainly it's good for me when Georgia wins. I like that, but I don't root. I try to analyze. I have individual people that I root for. You better believe I hope that that a guy like Dwan Mathis makes a healthy recovery. But if you're looking for the rah-rah stuff, there's plenty of people that do that. You guys know when Georgia does great things, I sure talk about it. And when there's times to be critical, personnel decisions last year on the perimeter, Tyler Simmons playing in a shoulder brace, I didn't like that, and I think it came back and haunted him. And I didn't think it was fair to Tyler. So I don't know if that answers your question. But if you missed the start of the show, I'm wearing blue. We're celebrating the United States. This is Memorial Day weekend. Find a veteran. Find a family that's had a service member that's made the ultimate sacrifice. To me, that's what's really important this weekend. We aren't just here by chance, all right? You look at our society, you look at the things that we have, the people watching on our broadcast tonight. We've got the benefit of this technology where I can stream off a front porch and see my neighbor watching me in a second. There's a lot of places in the world, man, they don't even know what Facebook is. The people that founded this country, that fought for our rights to put us where we're at, that's what Memorial Day weekend is about. I hope all of you recognize that and take a moment and think about that sacrifice, about somebody, willing to give their life for a cause and for a belief and for a future. And so that's what Memorial Day weekend is all about. And it's something that obviously means a lot to me, and I appreciate those families that have had people that have made the ultimate sacrifice, and that's what we celebrate this weekend. We celebrate that. Charles Kaiser, I couldn't say it any better. Freedom's not free. Nothing wrong with supporting your country and feeling good about your country. I know I appreciate that, and certainly we're all going through something together here. If nothing else, this daggone COVID-19 thing, it's unified all of us. It's all of us against that darn thing. And we're all trying to work it out. We're all trying to find solutions. We're all trying to support one another. You see people wearing masks, being careful, doing the social distancing, doing everything that they can, not just to protect yourself, but to protect your neighbor, to protect the person in public you don't even know, to let them know that, hey, I'm not going to affect you. It makes me squeamish still a little bit, honestly, when I'll go somewhere and we still have the social distancing and people aren't. And I just say, just for the sake of it, just a little bit longer. Let's keep these numbers down, man, because we're closing in. Football's coming. We're almost there, man. The kids are coming back on campus. They've got all these special provisions. We've got all this testing going on. We are gaining momentum as a country right now, and it's exciting. And I'm going to pray for those that are still having some of these issues. This pandemic is still serious in some states. I'm going to be sensitive to those people. I'm not going to tell them how to live their life, right? I'm going to be thankful that things are going good in Georgia, in my community, and I'm going to be sensitive to those people where it's not going so well. We've seen an outbreak in Montgomery, Alabama. I hope the best for those people. But as a whole, we are gaining momentum. But try to remain sensitive to others. Remain sensitive. Be measured in your approach. That's my personal advice. Be measured. Think about your decisions, where you go, how do you conduct yourself, and how you respect others with the social distancing and whatever local provisions that you have in place. Kind of just do your part, right? That's my message. I don't like to get on the soapbox too much, but some things I think it's worth talking about. It's worth mentioning. It's like I said, it's a Dog Nation room, man. It's not just we talk Georgia football, and we rally around Georgia football every Friday night here. On Friday night, I sit on my front porch, man. I drink peppermint tea. I don't worry about this or that or anything but talking to you guys and seeing what's on your mind. And Andrew Ray makes a good point there. When it's football, we're all happy, and right now we're all happy because football's coming back, and the leadership at Georgia's done a great job with that. Again, having a guy like Ron Corson, can't say his name enough, one of these hidden heroes. He's been there all these years. You keep going, why keep talking about this doctor? Because he's a difference maker. Because right now, those are the difference makers, and those are the people we appreciate. And we appreciate everybody, So, everyone, I'm going to cut it off tonight. I've had a lot of fun doing this. I'll probably be back Sunday night. We'll do a little Sunday night chat, wrap up the weekend. And then Monday night, 7:30. As of now, we're scheduled to go on Memorial Night. Michael Carvel, my producer, he's going to be plugged in. Can't do it without him. So I thank Michael Carvel for saying he's on Monday. I know we're kind of getting into our vibe, into our groove of when we watch and when we talk, when we visit. But I'll come back Sunday night with an abbreviated show. We'll talk about some things. If you've got questions, answer them or ask them right there in the comments. Or better yet, follow me on Twitter at MikeGriffith32. You can direct message me, and I'll hit you back. So thanks for joining me tonight. Everybody have a safe Memorial Day weekend. Take a moment to appreciate those that made the ultimate sacrifice, and be safe, everyone. Be safe and have a great Memorial Day weekend. Thanks a lot for joining me here on Friday Night Mike.